Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at USAGlobalTV.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Howdy all, this is red.olaughlin. We're on the Wise Ones on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. And about 3 weeks ago, I'm thinking maybe a little bit longer, I'm not quite sure, on the Corner Bookstore, I was honored to interview Janet Polach on her book. And today we have her back, but not from an author perspective, although we may very well go into that topic. Janet is an executive leadership coach, Ph.D., Colonel in the Marine Corps, retired, lots of things. Anyway, Janet, please join me.
It's nice to meet you and see you again, Red. Thanks for having me back.
Always. USA Global TV and Radio Network, I believe, has 55 shows that cover a wide gamut of fashion and design and cooking and authors. I mean, just all sorts of things. So lots and lots of things that we bring to the world. And we do have a worldwide audience. But this week, last time we talked about your book, The 7 Mistakes New Managers Make. And I'd like to maybe touch on that later on because there are some real valuable tidbits in there that I think any entrepreneur, even just as a single entrepreneur, they can make mistakes just as easily as if you're running a dozen people. But anyway, how did you get into the executive leadership coaching business? That's something that I've been intrigued. I see a lot of people there and they have years of experience working the way up the chain. So tell us how you got there.
Sure. I got my underpinnings in what is leadership all about in the United States Marine Corps. Quite honestly, I couldn't find a teaching job when I graduated from college. And so I looked around and I said, now what do I do? And the Marine Corps recruiters were just very talented. I thought I was going to spend a few years on active duty and then be done with that. And little did I know that I spent 20 years on both active duty and then lots of time in the reserves. And I discovered what leadership really is and looks like. And I also discovered by being a Marine that good leadership can be developed. It's developable skills. It's learning the basics and then practicing them and getting feedback. And so transition to the civilian world. I worked in a couple of organizations in learning and development, and then went out on my own as an executive coach and leadership developer. So for the last 15, 20 years, I have spent my time in doing executive coaching, executive team development. So if a team is new to each other, doing executive team development session is a really good idea. And then I also facilitate leadership development programs.
Okay, well, let's assume I have a company and I got 30 people, a 3 states. How do I know I need executive leadership, team building, the skills that you present? How do I know that as a business owner?
Oh, good question, Red, and one that gets asked a lot because development dollars, especially in a smaller company, are scarce. You know, you often want to spend your dollars on expanding your markets or creating product extensions. And yet, if your senior team isn't functioning well together, if they don't understand each other, maybe you have 1 or 2 members that are new to the senior team. They have their assumptions from their previous employer, but getting them all together in a room for half a day or a full day to describe how is it we're going to work together, what expectations do we have for each other, and what do we expect to accomplish in the next 90 and 180 days. That's what team development is all about. And I think almost any organization can benefit from taking time to pause and talk not just about what are we going to get done as a team, but how are we going to get done as a team.
It's interesting because if I'm hiring somebody, there's a certain amount of information on a resume and you can ask the technical questions. But to me, the key thing is how well does that person interface within that organization? And I've been back and forth over so many things and made mistakes because, okay, I'm listening to this guru say, I really need to have one of these kinds of people in my group. But in reality, people problems cause more issues than anything else I can think of. They live with you longer. They're more emotional. They're very disruptive. How do you minimize when in the hiring process, how do you minimize that level of angst and emotional potential disruption when you're hiring somebody new that all you can do is just ask them questions?
Right, right. So one way that I often get called upon with organizations is to do something called a pre-hire assessment. We use standardized psychometric tools that have standardized questions and have been highly validated, and then gives us a descriptor of what that person is going to be like. Do they talk more than listen? Are they aggressive more than collaborative? Do they like to work in a team, or would they rather go it alone? We can assess these things even before you extend the offer. I think there's a lot of organizations out there that don't even know those tools exist. You use somebody like myself who has a strong background in the assessments and know what they're talking about, because this isn't something you should do on your own. And it doesn't necessarily, doing pre-hire assessments doesn't necessarily strike somebody out. I don't think I've ever said to an organization, you shouldn't hire this individual. What it does instead is portray a style for how this person tends to work. They're much more deliberate and reflective. They like to take their time in making decisions. Well, if you need somebody to break into new markets, maybe that's not a good fit for you. But if you need someone who will create a product extension strategy, who is taking a really solid business and then growing it even further, that deliberateness may be a very good characteristic for you. So I think number one is to do pre-hire assessments. And then I think number two is to set very clear expectations what they're on board. Describe what due dates look like and what do you expect. A due date, for example, maybe I say it's due on Tuesday. Well, to some of that may mean 8 a.m. on Tuesday. Some of us may see that as sometime on Tuesday. Some of us may see it as before it becomes Wednesday. So that might be midnight. So I think the second strategy is to take time, set expectations, and be very, very clear about what do they mean operationally.
I've been fortunate to have a lot of very technical people work for me in civilian industry. And you always run the risk of, it's not a captive market like in the military. They're with you for 2 years, 3 years, because that's their place. But sometimes I have an engineer, I want to make them a section leader, I want to make them a supervisor. They have very little experience. They love being an engineer. They don't want the people problems. And so there's some training that has to go in there. But one of the things that I get from my other engineers is, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, or just a lot of personality issues as a supervisor. And I tell him, the guy is learning. I want him to learn from his mistakes. If he's not learning from his mistakes, I need to know that. Because you're interfacing with that person in a different role that I'm not seeing. And if he's not learning to improve, then I need to get involved so that I can help that person understand that, hey, you're making the same mistake over and over again, and we need to fix it. Happens, I'm sure, more often than not, no matter whether it's a technical background or not. We promote people up into things because we like them, we see potential, whatever. But sometimes we don't follow up with all the training and the monitoring. So would you go into a little bit about how you can help companies in that area?
Well, I think it starts, as I was just saying, with setting expectations. What are you expected to accomplish and in what time? And then as a leader, to check in. It's not monitoring because that's supervision, but as a leader, making sure that you are available to them on a regular basis, whether it's weekly or biweekly, to say, how is it going? What are you working on? What obstacles are you running into? What are you learning? And then how can I help you be successful? I think we, especially highly capable people, we kind of send and forget. We say, oh, he's got a great background. I just hired him from a really prestigious company. He'll be just fine. And yet then these folks aren't that way because we, as the leader, don't take time to check in with them, to have regular one-on-ones, to give them encouragement, to assess where they're at.
Sometimes we, as a company, have educational programs and the people take advantage of it and get certified in this or get a degree or whatever. I've seen it more than a few times where somebody in my organization gets an MBA, took 3 or 4 or 5 years to get, and they have expectations, as you said, but the company, yeah, they paid for it. They recognize the fact that it's there. They even have a party per person, but there's no promotion involved. And I think that has to be explicit upfront. We'll pay for your education, but there's no guarantee that person. However, now that person has more skills and they're gone, 6 months later, they're gone. You've lost, some level of value to your company. So how do you handle in an educational perspective? Okay, this guy's going to have an MBA in a year and a half. Is there a potential place for that person in this company or whatever? Because I'm sure you've bumped into that a few times where there's some feathers ruffled because, hey, I got this, but nobody's doing anything. They don't recognize me.
Right. Red, it's such a common challenge, isn't it? That organizations pay for college credits because we think that's a great benefit, and it is. It's very desirable, especially with the cost of education these days. And then what? Finishing a degree, as you said, doesn't lead necessarily to promotion. Yet, as a prudent manager of that individual, tapping into what they've learned and know is really critical. So finding out what they've discovered and maybe having them do a teach back is one strategy to leverage that investment. I think putting them on in an adjacent part of the organization, so as we call it, a lateral promotion or move, so that they can apply their skills, knowledge, and abilities in a different part of the organization, and again, get more challenge for themselves and yet do a little bit of payback on here's what I learned and here's how I'd like to apply that. I think finally talking to them about what their aspirations are. Some folks don't necessarily get an advanced degree because they think it will get a promotion. They get an advanced degree because they're really interested in learning. And so finding up front what is their expectation for making this personal investment in themselves is also really important.
I love that word expectation. In fact, I believe it was yesterday on social media, worst case 2 days ago, Gary V put a little blurb out there saying on LinkedIn, if you want to have a really good end of the year, set your expectations so low that they can't, because when you look at expectations, I think there was a study done maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago. What's the happiest country in the world? Well, the answer came back Denmark, because they set their expectations so low on a daily basis, they were always exceeded. And so when you look at your expectations, if you have low expectations and you exceed them all the time, you're happy. If your expectations are way up here and you can never get them, you're discouraged because I can't accomplish anything. So expectations is a critical item, both from our own personal mindset, our own personal growth, but company growth too. So when you're sitting down and you look at expectations, there has to be some level of reachability, some level of agreement that this is really, I'm the company president. This is what I want. This is what I expect. Well, there has to be some level of buy-in. Is that even viable? So when you're working with senior management, how do you start this expectation process, and how does it revolve in real life?
Well, Franklin Covey has a really great expectation setting model, and it is from X to Y by when. Some of us know the SMART expectation setting model, which is measurable and so forth. But I love this from X to Y by when. So from what's the current state to Y, which is what is the future state, and then by when. Is it a month from now? Is it 6 months from now? Is it a year from now or 2 years from now? I don't think we're deliberate in our setting expectations. What would you really like to see being done differently? And what amount of time do you have? And then what does different look like? Does it look like more frequency? Does it look like higher quality? Does it look like faster turnaround? And I think especially when we're coaching and working with experienced people, experienced individual contributors or leaders, we have a sense that, oh, I shouldn't tell them all that. I might be insulting them. And yet it's exactly the opposite. Giving them clear expectations with specific dates from X to Y by when gives them a great framework on how to think about what's expected of them and then by when.
It's interesting when you use the by when, that time factor. That is such a critical aspect of any kind of expectation. My one company I worked for, I was mid-level management, and I was involved to a degree, and within 1 year, they wanted to double gross revenues. That's a pretty big expectation.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And they had done all the little projections. They could do this. They could do all that stuff. But just because they could do it didn't mean they had the ability to do it.
Good
and was time even realistic to make it happen. And so I think when you're looking at expectations, as you said, that by when is such a big factor, because we fool ourselves sometimes. I can get this thing done by next week. I can get this done by next month, next year. But it doesn't happen. Life gets in the way. The economy changes. COVID, who knows what. Lots of things come out there, and we don't ever have a fallback position. We keep pushing against that expectation because we put it in writing, and that's what we expect. But anyway, how do we build excellence in businesses nowadays into the culture of the company?
Well, we've been talking about expectations, so of course that matters. I think then the second thing is recognition and reinforcement, catching people doing it right, thanking them for delivering a project on time and within budget, sharing that excellence with others, our colleagues. If you're an executive team, for example, I often encourage executive teams to start their meetings with recognition. Who's done something well this week, this month that they'd like to know about? And starting with that sense that I get to share what my people are working on, but then Red, you hear about what they're working on. And so when you run into them in the hallway or have a meeting on another topic with them, you can say, hey, I heard you did a great job of bringing in this new client or delivering this project on time and so forth. So I think reinforcing those cultural expectations with recognition and reinforcement is very, very critical.
Cultural expectations is a big one, especially when you have a worldwide organization. I belonged to one of those worldwide organizations many years ago. And once a quarter, we would have about a 16-hour day where we would start in one part of the world. And literally, if we had Zoom, we would have Zoom and see them, but it was all over the phone. And we would work time zone to time zone and literally work our way all the way around the world. And in one day, once a quarter, we would have a chance to talk with leadership all over the world. And I thought that was really a neat way of doing business. And it's some places, the culture is different over in Indonesia than it is in India, than it is in Africa, than it is in Europe. And having people in those locations that understand the cultural sensitivities, I think is a super critical thing to have. And when you brought that up, that to me just kind of, absolutely. That's a big, big deal when you're trying to, I want to grow, I want to be excellent, but I got to be sensitive too at the same time. It's just a part of the world. Yeah. Sensitivities, civility at work. Yes. I know you have a section that you've written about, and I kind of, went through that. This sounds like something I'd really like to chat about. So you have several things in there, let it be, let let the little stuff go a little. So let's talk a little about civility at work and some of the things that we can do to kind of minimize some of those emotional distraught issues that bleed over into management and other areas.
Yeah. Well, I think civility at work starts with expectations. I'm working with a client organizations right now that has had a lot of changes in their senior leadership. And the senior leaders have arrived into the organization with a culture they believe where people just didn't have to get stuff done. They missed deadlines. They maybe communicated about them. They maybe didn't. They thought they were already working hard, and yet they weren't really working at the pace of an industry standard. And so I think that, civility comes in the middle of all of that, which is we will be civil. Foul language isn't appropriate, innuendo and inferences about, body parts or the way people do things or their style or the way they look is completely out of range. And I think then we call people on it if it does happen. We get in the habit of saying, I'm sorry if, you let something slip that was inappropriate. And so setting that civility expectation, talking about what that civil behavior is, which is, something simple about how soon do you respond to someone's email request? Do you respond immediately? Well, no, that's not needed. But maybe within the hour to say, boss, I got your request. I'm working on it. Or, do requests need to be done by the end of the day before you go home? Every organization has a different set of what civility looks like. But I think communicating it and then reinforcing it and having consequences when it is not there.
You mentioned saying sorry, but in your, I'm going to say it was one of the blogs you wrote, if I remember right, when I was doing some research for today. You said, when you say sorry, really mean it, because, sorry. Well, that's not necessarily meaning it. But when you also mentioned earlier, recognition and saying thanks, gratitude, a lot of things really do mean a lot to people, even though it's mentioned very briefly. You mentioned earlier at the beginning of the meeting, recognition. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And a lot of times other people don't realize what somebody else has accomplished. So, but civility, it's one of those cultural things too. You may have some that no matter what, they're not going to say anything bad about anybody. That's the way there it is. And in the old days, dealing with Indonesia or somewhere over there, I had a name that was different than most of the others. I was dealing with somebody, they didn't know what was going on, but my communications were ending up in another part of the country because there was another guy named there, McLaughlin. I was an O'Laughlin, and somehow they got things So I just went with my FMOL, and that was how I was known for the next period of time. Well, somebody over there thought I was of the local culture because of that particular deal. And all of a sudden I got 3, 4, 5, 6 foot telexes at that time where somebody would just do a core dump of all the emotional issues going on that they would never share with Americans because they thought I was a local. And so those are things there that, well, we got a real problem here with this guy over there because he doesn't understand the cultural sensitivity. So there's so many things there that can go wrong and we're never aware of it. And so that's a hard nut to crack sometimes, and it doesn't always become apparent. So anyway, when we're leading with excellence and we have our expectations, how do we grab a hold of the strategies that we need to make them happen? Because I can go down 2 or 3 different roads, and you're there talking to leadership saying, you really want this done in 6 months, this is what you're going to have to give up. So in other words, you're kind of the arbitrator, so to speak. Yeah, you can do it, but you have to realize that this is not going to happen, or that's not going to happen, the board's not going to be, whatever it may happen to be. How do you have those honest discussions with somebody that it's their company, but you're just an outsider coming in saying, hey, your baby's ugly?
Yeah. Well, I think as an outsider coming in, I generally won't make declarative statements, Red. I like to ask questions instead. Things like, let's talk about, that 6-month commitment. We have all these number one priorities, and things are not getting done. And so start with a set of questions. What were the assumptions that you made that suggested you could get all these things done in 6 months? Maybe they had a different staffing level complexion at the time. Maybe they were expecting more out of people to work extra hours and so forth. I think asking questions about which of these many priorities, which are the 2 or the 3 that will move the needle the most in terms of performance of the firm, and which ones are you worried about the most? So rather than coming in and saying your baby's ugly, even if I think that, getting them to have a real conversation where they listen more than talk, that they ask good questions to help understand, so that collectively they can move forward.
That I like that, because you're asking questions. There's no declarative statement saying this is right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see where trust becomes a building block, because it's part of your understanding of how and why they got to where they're going. That I think is pretty critical. And that was also one of the things that I remember right in the blog you wrote on civility, that you're not dumping on somebody, you're not declaring something that everybody may know, but you're asking a question that's somewhat neutral and allowing things to kind of settle down a little bit. So that asking questions applies in so many different areas of your executive leadership coaching and other things. Another word that I like a lot that you touched on is resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about developing a resiliency muscle, if I remember the proper terminology. Let's talk a little bit about resiliency and business today and culture.
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, resiliency is the ability to bounce back in the face of adversity. So some of it may be just as simple as the boss says no or not now, and you then have to regroup with you and your team. Some of it may be a real disappointment. A relationship failed. A child is not doing as well as you thought they should be doing in school. So it's that willingness to to think about what went wrong and what would I do differently next time. And I think that reflecting and what would I do differently next time is the key to being a good, resilient person.
I know that when I work for a company and I have my final interview with the boss, and I'm just about ready to be hired, one of the things I like to talk about is the fact that I realize you're the boss, you're going to tell me what to do. But if I see something that I think is wrong, I want the ability to tell you I think it's wrong. And if you say, okay, fine, I considered it, we're still doing it this way, no problem.
Right.
It minimizes my emotional continuation of something I should have said something about, but I didn't. And when I have that ability, it takes care of my resiliency right away. He says, boss, I don't think this is right. And why? And he says, okay, I hear what you're saying, but we're still doing it my way. Okay, I've already said my piece. I'm happy. I'm done. I know my working directions. It's something that you don't always have the ability to do in the military. When you say, do this, there's no feedback, so to speak. You just do it. But in civilian industry, if you have that understanding with your boss up front, and whether I do with my engineers and whatever else, that makes things a whole lot easier, because, okay, fine. If you considered that and you still want me to do this, great. I have no problem doing it, but I do have a problem if I never tell you about it. And that to me, I think, is part of my personal resiliency, because it makes it easier to do that. Your thoughts?
I think resiliency is a lot about learning. It's, I can't change what happened. There's no way I can. But what can I learn from that experience? Should I have been more prepared for a meeting that didn't go so well? Should I have done a better analysis so that I had my numbers lined up well? Should I have not even had a conversation and engaged my team a little bit more first so that I didn't surprise them? So I think being resilient is a lot about what did I learn and what would I do differently next time if I'm given the chance.
Okay, I agree. I like that. 7 mistakes that new managers make.
Mhm.
Says doing instead of leading. Well,
Mm,
I can easily see that one because we always know how to do it easier, faster, better. And
right.
now we're jumping something on somebody who may not have that same level of capability. So let's talk a little bit about some of the mistakes. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just open it. What are the 2 or 3 things that are easy to see, easy to fix that
Mm.
new managers make that they shouldn't? They should learn from.
Well, I think giving feedback is one of them. I think we often avoid giving feedback because we think it's going to damage the relationship. When there is an issue, it's not going to just get better about itself, by itself. And so having a good way to give feedback to others that not necessarily trods through old ground, but looks at towards the future. Again, what would I do differently next time? I think taking time to give others recognition, that kind of fits together with the feedback. I think a mistake a lot of new managers make is not taking time to develop the skills on their teams. They often think, I'll just send them to training. Well, that may give them the how to's, but that doesn't give them the how to apply at our work environment. So, thinking that developing your team's capabilities is somebody else's job, not your own, I think is one of the big mistakes. And then creating time for innovation and thinking about things differently. So often leaders say to me, "Oh, Jan, I'm not creative at all. I don't have creative bone in my body. I can't even draw a stick person." And innovation isn't about that. It's about facilitating conversations that you think about things in different ways and create breakthrough thinking. You don't have to come up with all the ideas yourself. You have to facilitate the idea making.
We have different levels of leadership, for lack of a better word. You have a lead that's in a particular group, and you have a supervisor, you have a manager, and then you have the leader. What's the little nuances in the difference in the growth path from being put in charge of 2 or 3 people, a small group, to a
Mm.
larger group, a whole company? So, what are those
Yeah.
little things we have to learn along the way?
Well, Red, I'm glad you asked because I'm just finishing my second book, which is called The Strategic Leader's Mindset. And it's how do you shift the way you think about leading from a broader context? So, as a supervisor or frontline manager, you're responsible for 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 other people in getting their work done. As a strategic leader, it's someone at the top of the organization, say a vice president. You are responsible for not just your function, but how your function connects into different parts of the business. So let's say you're the marketing function, you've got to figure out what the production function is like and what the sales machine is like. And so it's not just about the work of your own team, but it's thinking broader into the entire organization. How does my group fit in more broadly? And if I start a new initiative, what will be the both positive and negative impact of that initiative on my peer, other parts of the organization?
Okay, so as I get higher up, I need to know more about other parts of the company and how they function,
Absolutely. Yep.
intimately how they function,
Mm-hmm.
individually within that department, but interrelationally between and among all the different organizations. But we also need to know the competition, our
Mm-hmm.
environment, the economy, regulatory. I mean, I think we learned a super lot from COVID when we sent people home and made them work at home. Now all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, they want to leave home because they have a comfort zone, and they can do their job. And they're saying, "Why do I need to be at work?" There's lots of things there that's added a whole new dimension into this leadership conundrum of being able to understand who does what when. Uh,
Yep.
and how do you still have companies that are having difficulty getting their workers back into their offices?
Well, there was an article that just came into my inbox this morning from Corn Ferry that talked about how CEOs are still very disappointed that more employees don't want to come back to work, and they're getting used to that. This is the reality, that employees are comfortable spending maybe 2 days a week on site on the job, but the rest of the time they'd rather be working from their home. And if they're required to come into the office, they may look for another job. And so, yes, organizations are still struggling with that. The big issue is, how do you maintain a culture? How do you build relationships? How do you really get to know your employees well when you only get to see them in this kind of format? And I think it's, you have to be more deliberate in team meetings. It's not just the agenda, but talking about how are people doing, and who's doing what that's kind of interesting this weekend. It's making sure that you have those regular one-on-ones, and you're talking about not just what is their workload like and what tasks are they working on, but again, how are they doing? How are they learning and growing? So it can be done. Many organizations across the world are doing it very successfully. But I think as an executive, to wish that people would just come back, I don't think is a successful strategy.
No, people can leave anytime they want. They're not a captive audience, but there again, another company may expect them to be at their offices all the time. So there's a double-edged sword when you start playing that. But
yeah,
was there anything I should have asked you about executive leadership that I didn't, that you think our audience should know about?
Well, I think the idea of coaching. We didn't talk much, Red, about when is an executive coach right for you? And I think it comes a couple of times. I think it's when you've been considered a high potential and yet you consistently get passed over for those next exciting roles. If you're unclear about what your next couple of steps in your career is, working with a coach, somebody one-on-one, is a great way to have those kind of conversations. I think if you have an employee who is kind of struggling with maybe performance, maybe they're not necessarily in the right fit in their job, having them work with a coach. Fundamentally what coaching does is give that person one-on-one time for reflection. Yes, many of us have a significant other in our life, and we may bounce ideas off of them, but they don't have the same perspective as that one-on-one coach does. And so coaching really gives you a chance to reflect on what you're thinking in a very safe way, and then maybe come to some new insights about it based on that conversation.
Okay, fantastic. I appreciate that. A lot of good clarification there. Janet, thank you very much for joining us today. How do people get in touch with you for your services? I hear you have a new book coming out. Is that going to be this year, or?
The new book is coming out in October. The 7 Mistakes is the old one. The new one is The Strategic Leader's Mindset. They can find me on my webpage, janetpolach.com. That's JanetPolach.com. And my email is very simple, janet@janetpolach.com. I would just love to talk to you about developing your team or developing yourself as a leader.
Well, fantastic. So you have a couple of options, team-wise, company-wise, individual-wise, and I really appreciated your in-depth analysis today, because some of those things I kind of knew a little bit about, not being an executive coach, but I've had the experience in other areas from military and whatever. And so I think you really melded together the best parts of the military and the best parts of our leadership gurus, and how can we make our world a better place for us at work and for us as a company. So thank you so very much.
Thanks, Red. It was really great fun.
And thank you, Janet. And let's see here. We are about 19 minutes away from our next show called Talking Heads on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. It's a show I do every week. And this particular last 4 or 5 weeks, we've been talking about the heart of health, which started out a certain way and kind of ended up a little bit about longevity, a little bit about actually a heart and disease and health. And we're picking up a little bit more today on heart and other things that affect us. And so please, get a chance, join me live here in a few minutes, or certainly on YouTube on the USA Global TV and Radio Network on the show called Talking Heads with Red O'Laughlin. With that, I bid you adieu, and we will catch you next week. Take care. Bye now.
Five Little Known Secrets for Dementia Caregivers with Tracy Cram Perkins.
Hi there, I am Tracy Cram Perkins, the host of the Dementia Home Care Show here on USA Global TV and Radio. I am also the author of the book of the same name. And you'll see this QR code. This is for an extended version of the same talk. So if you want to see the full hour-long version, feel free to scan the code and go to that website. Stick with me. We'll talk about 5 little known secrets to make it a little easier to do dementia caregiving. What you're seeing on the left-hand side is a healthy aged brain, age 55 and above. The one you're seeing on the right is an Alzheimer's disease brain. It is in moderate disease. It is shrinking. It has holes in it. The memories that were in those holes no longer exist. When you're learning something, let's say in kindergarten, you learn how to tie your shoelace. Well, then by the time you're in second grade, your brain remembers that information from tying the shoelace and applies it so you can learn more quickly how to tie more complex knots. So the brain is hardwired to do this for us. So it helps us learn faster so it doesn't take us long to acquire knowledge. The brain is looking for the information and they pick the closest to wherever that hole is. Let's look at some tips that we can use to help do that.
These are 5 simple tools you can use as a dementia caregiver to help your loved one. The whiteboard is a useful tool in recording the day's activities and the answers to repetitive questions. The calendar clock is a very useful tool to orient your loved one on the day, the date, and the time, and remind them of upcoming appointments. The communication cards are a great tool to bridge the gap when they can no longer tell you what's wrong. And then there's the pill minder for when your loved one is still able to take pills but needs prompting. The final tool I want to share with you is the memory book. It tells your loved one's story. It's a great tool for distraction, redirection, also as a conversation starter, and telling you where they are in their story so you know how to answer their questions.
Music is probably the most powerful tool in your toolbox after laughter. Music is a way to maintain connection. It sticks with your brain longer than any other thing, including reading. When you're having an issue with somebody, you can play their favorite music if you move them to another room, something that makes them happy, or you can start singing songs together from their childhood. These are some of my favorite books for caregivers. My show airs on the 3rd Tuesday of every month, and you can view past episodes on YouTube. Thank you, everyone.
This program has been brought to you in part by Tracy Cram Perkins. Connect with her and order her book at tracycramperkins.com. For more information about Alzheimer's disease, support resources, and how you can help, contact the Alzheimer's Association at 1-800-272-3900 or visit their website at www.alz.org. They offer 24/7 helpline support and a wealth of information to assist you and your loved ones.